The PowerPoint and the video of today will be posted on our website, ctcleads.org. And then I do want to thank Jerry Lewis there in the back from Columbia Basin College for videotaping this session so we can all see it and share it with others later on. So now I'd like... And so Cindy Huff.
Thank you.
I'm here to talk about WELA. How many people know at least a little bit about WELA and what it does? Okay, we've got just a few who didn't raise their hands. Okay, WELA is the Washington Executive Leadership Academy. It's designed for people who are 2 to 3 years, our employees who are 2 to 3 years away from being either a vice president or a president. And it's the Leadership Academy for the state, by the state, our state. And the application process for this next cohort, which will be the 2018-19 cohort, is open now. All of the presidents have received a letter announcing the opening of the recruitment season, and the deadline is April 20th. And I'm here all afternoon, so if you have any specific questions, feel free to come and ask them of me. The WELA group is governed by a governing board. I call it, that's got the representative from WAC, the trustees, alumni, and 2 other positions I can't think about right now. State board, that's it. And they have designed a survey let me go back. WELA is 18 years old right now, and it's kind of time to say, are the assumptions that we made 19, 20 years ago appropriate for the program today? And there will be a survey to help the board answer that question going out, and there will be one survey going out to college presidents, one going out to WELA graduates, another going out to some trustees, and then to one at the administrative level of our colleges. And some of you may get an opportunity to participate in 2 parts of that series. Like Kevin will get one as a president and as a WELA grad, so he'll be able to answer 2 parts of that survey. Others will answer only one. And if you receive the survey within the next 10 days or so, next week, next 10 days, please take the time to read through it and answer it to the best of your ability, because this is an important program for our system, for our colleges, and we need your feedback in order to make the evolutionary, if not disruptive, changes to the program so that it's serving our colleges and our employees today and tomorrow. And thank you. I think you need anything else?
How about having people from WELA stand up?
Oh, WELAites. Perk up, WELAites. Everybody who is in the cohort this year, could you stand and remain standing? We got some shy people. Okay. And then remain standing. Everybody who graduated from WELA, please stand. Yes, it's still truth. Thank you, folks. We have 7 WELA grads who are currently presidents and 2 more who are interim presidents at the moment. And we've got, I am actually trying to finalize the count, but we have 30-something vice presidents scattered around our colleges. So we've got And then we've got about 20 who've already retired. It's been around so long. So anyhow, thank you, Wheelites, for being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. So as Cindy mentioned, we've been putting together a survey that'll be coming out. It should be next week is our plan that it'll come out. We're going to have a short turnaround on it, so it doesn't kind of start lingering or malingering in your inbox. And so it'll be probably about a 10-day turnaround once you get it. So you'll have some time to think about it, but don't put it into to be done in April because it'll be timed out by then. So now Stephanie Delaney.
Hi, everyone. As you know, this is the CTC Leadership Development Association, and one of the things that we do to help develop leadership is to support people as they continue on with their degree options. So we have scholarships. We do 2 scholarships for staff and 2 for students. They're $1,200 each, and the scholarship period opened yesterday. So now's the time. Get your letters of recommendation and the like all together and send them to us. It is a competitive process, but it is possible to get these scholarships. You can get all of the information that you need about the scholarships at our website, ctcleads.org. On your conference agendas at the very bottom is a little note saying, apply now, and then it gives you a website. Ignore that website. Just go to the CTC Leads website, and it has all the information that you need. Just a side note, last year, as I mentioned, we have 2 staff and 2 student. Last year, not a single student applied. Is that pathetic or what? So we gave away 4 staff ones, so yay for that. But this year, we'd really like to have some students apply. So in the coming weeks, you're going to get an email saying, hey, if you know people who could use this scholarship, send this email to them. Please make sure it gets to your financial aid people on your campuses and your faculty and your students, because students really should apply. It's a sad time if we leave money on the table. So for those of you who are pursuing degrees, please apply and share it with people that you know. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephanie. Okay. We now have a few minutes to kind of wind up the lunch before Michael starts again. So thank you for your attention on. Okay, everyone. Okay, let's filter back to our seats. It's always good to have such a noisy lunch crowd. Everyone's getting along. That's great fun. I like this setup where, I know some of you, the Bellevue contingent here is in force, so you're with people you see a lot, but it's been fun at some of these mixed tables to be with colleges that you aren't normally with. And so I hope people are enjoying meeting new people, because always these events are important, not just for the content, but for the networking we do and what we can learn from each other. So that's good to see. So I'm going to turn it over to Michael now, and we'll continue the good morning's progress. Thanks.
Sounds good. Thanks so much. Before we kick off into the brainstorm, I just thought it made sense to let it open for questions, comments. I'm curious, the 5 jobs, it seemed like it resonated, but I'd love to get people's take on that, a little bit of share out, as well as any questions or thoughts about implications for programs before we get into the brainstorm. Anyone want to? Yeah.
Having had 3 kids going to college, looking at the list there's a lot of stuff there that just resonated, absolutely, including those who wanted, I made the comment, their friends who were going to colleges and made brand name choices, as if they were buying something from J. Crew or Abercrombie.
Which I know is how faculty love to be thought of, right? Yeah.
Will you be providing us with some, since you've given us new ways of looking at demographics and
Yeah.
what the job really is, from a practical standpoint, for a college that may have limited amount of research, institutional research and development funds, we can't do, I don't think, exactly what you described you were able to do for your book.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
will you be able to share with us some practical things that we can do, since we may not be able to interview our potential
Yeah.
students? Because I think, as Andy said, this all resonated and made sense, but how do we figure it out as an institution?
So I'll tell you selfishly, so I'll tell you two things. One, we're right now looking at trying to build an app that would allow institutions to figure out what jobs are they serving, and students to, quite frankly, before they apply, even help them
Great.
identify. That said, what I have learned, and now we're on our third round of working with institutions doing these quantitative work, is it's hard. It's hard to get the questions right for the same reason they can't tell you what job they're in. And so we've been dancing. And so we'd love to, like, you know, if you're willing to let us try it out with you all and stuff like that, like, love to have that conversation. And, you know, yes, I work for a consultancy, but even just the free Edmonds College, got it. So like, let's do it. Because I said to someone at break, I can't remember who, my gut instinct is that if you went deep into an institution, you'd probably find 2 to 3 of these jobs in large numbers. And then if you went deeper, you'd probably find some really particular nuance within each of those, and you'd probably get to, you know, 6 different flavors of 2 or 3 jobs, right? And then if you went into academic programs or things like that, then you'd get further nuances around that. We, you know, unless there's like a paid engagement, we probably can't help with that. But at the high level, just understanding these 5 and the intensity of each in the campus, that's something we could do. And it's in our interest, quite frankly, to hone for the book, so to get more information. So we'd be happy to just like find a way to do that. Yeah, and that goes for anyone. I probably should have said this up front. So my Twitter's Michael B. Horn. My website is also michaelbhorn.com, and there's a little contact box there, and it goes right to my email. So, but I'd love to just, you know, anyone that is willing to deploy it, it's great for us right now as we do the research, right? So, yeah.
You know, it strikes me as interesting because many of us already know some of those jobs. I mean, when you put them
Yeah.
out there,
They make sense, right?
Yeah, they make sense to us, but we still go ahead and ask. It's student intent, really, and so we still frame it for them in our model, which is: do you want a degree? Do you want a certificate? Are you here to, you know? So
And
this
we were
is
guilty
another
of it.
way.
Yeah, and we were guilty of it too, right? Like we used to write white papers. You can read some of my old writing from 2013 and 14, where I'm like, we speculate that there's 4 reasons people go to college. 1 is to get a job, 2 is a career, 3 is a coming of age experience, and yeah, I don't know what 4 was, but and you just, there's no substitute for actually crawling in the lives of the students and figuring out what their stories are and how they talk about it, and using their language, not ours. And that's the really interesting part. I think what we're grappling with on the survey also is the help me get away. No one wants to admit that that's them. It's a really hard one. So we were calling it help me escape, which was just too harsh language. So that's why we've renamed it help me get away now. We're hopeful that'll help a little bit. But we're definitely still like, we're tweaking right now. You all are getting this in the early, you know, the 5th inning, so to speak. Yeah.
It seemed to me that the next, or one of the next levels of this is creating wraparound services for the different
Yeah.
jobs, right? So each of them have different needs, and you don't need to expend a lot of resources, you know, on jobs 2 and 3 because they're committed.
Yeah, they're there. Yeah.
But if you can understand what it looks like for people who are job 1, help me get away or escape, and can target some things and some wraparound services and make them appealing, right, to those people for that job, then that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's a great point. Anyone that has thoughts on those, by the way, I'd welcome thoughts on that as well. Because again, I'm this is me as a researcher just talking through our process, but 80% of the book is the draft is written, and there's two chapters left that aren't. One of them is recommendations for institutions, and I have just this huge file of dumped stuff right now, and I just thought about which services would help where and so forth would be enormously useful to us to hear from folks on the ground about what would you do knowing this with, it sounds like almost every one of you is oh, I can visualize a student in each of these jobs. And what would you do to help them knowing that? It's again, the Help Me Get Away one, I'm just going to use that example again. It's interesting because like they have to act, right? Like the act of getting away is the progress they need to make. But committing to something with a large use of resources and time in the absence of switching jobs is not a wise idea for them. And so it's almost like, how can the college give them a short sprint program or like the equivalent of a gap year that has several different courses, or rethink what gen ed looks like in some way, right? That allows them to find that passion and move into Help Me Step It Up or whatever it is. So, yeah. So we have some thinking, but just to say, would love help here. Others, thoughts, criticisms? All right, this is helpful. I'll emphasize the one thing again. So as we get into the brainstorm, what I'd love you all to do at your table is you can take these 5 jobs as the given if you want. I think it's a pretty robust starting place. It seems to be resonating. And so think through this question that you just asked, like what are the implications for what we do today, and what specific jobs might we want to target in the future, or program areas that would be suited for certain jobs, right, that are desirable for tomorrow. And and you might take 5 minutes, I think, yourself just to jot down some notes on those stickies and then come together as a group. And I think this is more of a 15, 20 minute just brainstorm of implications and so forth. And then I'll probably selfishly capture some of this. But just to think through what might you do with this information. The other thing I'll say is there is this question in my head of like, how would you purpose build programs along the lines of specific jobs, in the sense that like serving a job 1 and 2 in the same program is going to probably be really hard and create a lot of overhead. How could you, if you really want to serve students who are just trying to get away and move them into maybe a more productive place in their life, how would you build a purpose-built program for them that then results in them also enrolling for job 2? I don't know the answer to that, but it's a set of questions that I think you might think about as you go into a brainstorm here. And the last thing is, and this probably looks different from an IT major to a nursing, and health, right? Like there's different manifestations of it as well. So that makes sense. All right, so let's dive in. We'll take about, what time is it right now? Probably 12:45, 12:50. So take till about 1:10, 1:15, and then we'll come back and do a little share out around what we've learned. And then this, just to give you a preview, when we come back after that, the work is going to be around how do we manage the innovation process, given all the ideas that we could do. How do we try to structure ourselves to be able to take into account the goals that we're trying to reach and the resources at our disposal? It goes a little bit to the question I think a lot of folks are asking, like, that makes a ton of sense, but so-and-so is never going to let me do this. And some of that is reality, but some of it is also how can we shape that reality? So, okay, let's do it. And if this is helpful, I just typed up all 5 jobs so they're in one place. Yeah. All right. Let's come back together. We'll do a little share out. Two just quick observations that I had. That just for whatever it's worth. Someone said, how should we start to think about new programs that we're, doing and so forth in this construct. If you have someone, if you're saying we're going to serve students who are coming to us to help me step it up, and are hiring us to help them step it up, what that looks like for someone doing that in nursing probably looks very different, right, from an IT program and the set of things that you would do and so forth. And so you go down some more nuance. One more thing, which is something I should have said before, but the help me do what's expected of me job, I framed it as the 18 to 24-year-old student who's doing that. There was an interesting other persona in the research that came out, which was an adult learner, and it resonates because earlier someone was saying, we work with these employers and try to get them to give us our employees and so forth. And several employees that we talked to had registered for programs to get bachelor's or associates or whatnot. And they basically were like, I don't really know why I'm enrolled in this program, but my employer said they'd pay for it. And my mom always wanted me to get a degree, and and you were like, well, doesn't it help you advance at work? And they're like, no, I work at a retail store, and it's a healthcare degree. Like, I don't think it has anything to do with it. It's interesting. I think there's a rage right now of it's all about employer partnerships, and I'm probably guilty of writing that too. You kind of have to nail their jobs and also the students' jobs too. So this nuance, I think, is important of where you said before, understanding everyone's jobs in the chain. So with that, just as a couple editorial things, because I thought it might be interesting, who wants to share out some observations, thoughts, things that they kind of want to try when they go back? Oh, come on. There's a lot of conversation going on. I'm going to have to cold call. All right, I'm going to cold call then. So, we'll go back there. Yep. Microphone is coming around.
One of the things we talked about is that we have a lot of number fives and number ones. And so if students know what they want, they seem to have a high level of satisfaction, right? So we've talked about perhaps using the summer as a time where we could offer 2-week intensive that wouldn't be a class in the sense of credit bearing or anything like that, but something where we would bring in people from industry and so on to talk about the kinds of things they do, what they look for, skills-wise and everything, and then have advisors and stuff talk, work with the students and so on. So to create a space that is no stakes, but exposes students to a lot of things and does it in a time frame which is manageable for us as an institution.
Makes a ton of sense. Yeah.
So that number one, without the context that you added about the research, just looking at it, help me get away. I'm just thinking specifically of our Whatcom Community College is situated where, certainly we get students from all over the place, but that, we often draw local students from local high schools, Ferndale High School, Bellingham High School, and that, we think of this less about geography and more about mindset, so help me get away might be interpreted as help me get away from people who don't see me or see my strengths, right? So getting deeper into the sense of purpose of what it is that we're providing for students as they're walking in to our institutions. It's not about whether or not we're going to move away from the question of why aren't students coming here, and more about what do we have in place in terms of systems and structure that are preventing students from walking in the door as a result of not seeing their identity and not seeing their strengths. So it's just a little bit of a flipped combo.
I love it. And actually, if you looked at our sample, I think 55% or 53% of those who experienced the Help Me Get Away job at some point, they enrolled in their town. So getting away wasn't necessarily geographic, to your point. It might have been like this dead-end job doesn't work anymore. I don't know what I want to do, but college seems like an acceptable answer, right? So I think it's a really good it's a good nuance, a good point. Others? Did I see a hand start to go? Come on. There's so much conversation going on. No one wants to share out. All right, well, I'll give one more of mine from a takeaway that I had from a conversation, but which was a little bit on this question of, do we need to deploy a quantitative survey to figure this out or not? There was the notion, all of you sort of feel like that you know a student in each of those contexts. I bet you do a 20-minute interview with a student about why their story of coming to here before they start, and you would probably be able to categorize them awfully quickly into these things and get a lot more deeper sense of what they need to be successful and start to identify some of these patterns in some cases. So there's probably a low-tech, little high expense maybe in terms of conversation, but heck, conversations with students are where it's at. So way of doing this as well to some degree. So yeah.
Is there any, I mean, all of us probably use the same application form that's required by the state.
Mm-hmm.
And would there be, in your experience, with those being the jobs we have filled, have you seen anyone revamp their application so that it's gathering information that's useful? Or are they so confused and the only way to get this is through a 20-minute interview with most of the students?
Yeah, so my instinct is you could build this into the application, and that for certain of the jobs. I haven't thought about it entirely, but and I'll look it up at the next break. Exactly the process we recommended for job 2, because that's the one that's present in my mind. But the it was sort of I don't want to bungle it. So let me look it up and then I'll say it. But we had basically a 3-step process for the student to say, make sure you've clarified your vision and present that vision. And that's the question that I think you would want to ask as a school on the application, to make sure that vision is actually as clarified as and that they can it's internally consistent, right? To actually safely say, I understand you and you've understood yourself. And you're ready for, and our program is built for Help Me Step It Up. It's not built for Help Me Get Away. We feel comfortable that that this is going to be a good fit or not. Yeah.
Similar to that, for 1 and 2, we talked about even asking a simple question like, how confident are you in that this is what you want to do? And if it's fairly confident, we would implement 2. But if it's not, then we would suggest something more exploratory and
Sure.
and all that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way. I mean, and the other thing is often, and the flip is also true, right? If you can figure out, students are often, all of us are often able to cross things out that we don't want to do more than we're able to select what we do want to do. And so there might be different ways of phrasing things, right? No, I'm not that. That might also help. It's a good point. So the answer is I haven't seen it, but also like we obviously haven't been out there with this research yet. You're the 3rd or 4th group I've ever talked to about it. So I don't know yet. One other thing, by the way, my sense is that it like a place like Harvard Business School that asks like, what's your purpose and why are you coming here, and like Loft, that they may have implicitly built this into their application without understanding it. And I wonder if that's something that's a feature of a couple elite places that have the freedom to do that, but maybe not as widespread a practice across all of higher ed. I don't know, but it's something. Someone said this to me a couple days ago after I was done presenting this. They made that comment about Harvard Business School specifically, and I just don't know enough. I haven't thought about it, but yeah.
Well, if we could figure it out even simply.
Yeah.
And then be able to follow up with that simple information on, well, we could provide you with this, this, and this. Because once you know why they come to us, we have a better idea of what resources we either already have and just need to bring to their attention, or what we need to develop because we're missing coding.
Totally agree. Yeah. No, I think you're 100% right. Yeah.
Quick question, because I sent a copy of this to my therapist.
Yeah.
He wants to know is it right.
Ranked meaning. Oh no, no. This is a random 5. No, not ranked. Well, he can see the slides now. I don't know when the book will be out because that's not my choice. We don't have a publisher yet, but that's not going to be the issue. The issue is going to be the timeline of the publisher. But the slides, once these get shared out, I'll send them to Katie. You all can use them and share them within your campuses and use them or abuse them however you want. I'm pretty open source on these things, so I think we're all trying to make progress for students. It doesn't behoove me to say you can't use them. So, yeah. And again, my guess is as you go deeper in your campuses, you're going to start to develop nuances on this that we're not able to detect as we do a national scan also. And that I think will be that's where the big breakthroughs will come in advantages, right? Where you're like, oh, this is the thing that unlocks this student on my campus who comes to me with this, and it's very different in a different region or circumstance. So, okay. Appreciate you guys diving deep. If you have further thoughts, as you can tell, I'm very much an open book, literally, on this right now, and pretty excited about it. So would love to keep digging in. We're going to go into this last part of this question, which is how do we manage this process of innovation and sort of control when we're getting lots of different ideas and lots of things are coming for us. And first, I'm going to give you a free resource that is not out yet publicly, but you all can grab it at this link. We put up a draft white paper that we're about to come out at Entangled Solutions of innovation management, and it literally outlines what I'm about to talk through. So if you want the voiceover, you can just grab it and use it directly from there. I'll keep it up there for a moment. Everyone got it? Well, you'll get the site, you'll get the PowerPoint as well. It probably asks you to put your email in, and then we may follow up, obviously, to see if you want to work with us, but because that's what consultants do. So so step one that we talk about is really before you can manage innovation, you've got to know why are we innovating, right? And so this may sound basic, but it's clarify what your goals are and what your gaps toward your goals are. And these can be wide-ranging things. I just put up a few here just so we could simply talk about it. But, as opposed to a company that's trying to innovate against the bottom line and has a pretty clear set of numbers, campuses obviously are complex places with goals around enrollment, diversity, graduation rates, links to employment, maybe revenue that it's trying to bring in, student-faculty composition. You can imagine lots of things that might be important to a campus. And so our point is more take a wide view of what your goals are and then state some very clear, you can call them SMART goals, but basically specific ways, though, that you would know that this is where we actually want to get to as a campus. And then how far away are we right now? What are our gaps? And once you've identified those gaps, you might say, we want to be, enrolling 1,000 students per year. We're sitting at 800 right now. And we want to be graduating 80%. We're sitting at 70% right now, making these up, right? Those start to give you very clear gaps of where you are. And that allows you to build a strategy, which is a strategy toward the gaps. And what we often say is start with what you don't want to do. Like what's out of bounds. And so I'm not going to use a community college example here. I'll use a liberal arts one. A 4-year liberal arts college might say, out of bounds is building an online program that is going to quadruple enrollment for us. That's just not who we are. We want to stay small and be purposeful around that. That is important, but then start to clarify based off of the goals, why are we doing this and how will we do it and what will we do? And you start to get a sense of what types of programs or initiatives or small steps or slight improvements or wraparound services, it can be anything, right? It doesn't have to be disruptive for a second. Anything that starts to fit into this so that we can start to advance against our goals. And once you've done that, you start to move into step 3, which is then to implement a portfolio approach to execute the strategy. And someone said to me, it feels like, given that not everything you try is going to be successful, you need a portfolio approach. Someone said that to me during the lunch, so that's exactly what I'm going to talk about after lunch. Is exactly right. You want a portfolio approach, and basically what's happening, if as a campus leader or someone, is you've got tons of people, faculty, administrators, alumni, students, community, whomever, policymakers, people like me, who think that they have lots of great ideas that you ought to go do. And they're just sending tons of things in the innovation funnel. And what we do is end up weeding through them and end up implementing at the end some set of them. And the struggle is if you don't have a clear tool to help you manage against this, you have three risks. You can overcommit and try to do too much, and execution just halts. And this is actually one of the biggest things that plagues organizations, is not that they're not innovative, it's that they're trying to be too innovative and take on too much, and each person says, oh, I can do that too, I can do that too, I can do that too. And no one has any time. You just like budgeting for it. And then the second one is you see so many things, and you don't commit to anything, and you just get paralyzed talking about things over and over again. And we see a lot of that planning without doing. And then the third is you might commit to the wrong mix of projects, meaning some projects to realize. Let's just stay with the enrollment goal for a moment, just because it's an easy one to talk through. If you're trying to double your campus over the next 5 years, the number of students you serve, you can imagine that there might be some pretty big new programs you want to launch that are going to serve hundreds of students in and of themselves. And you might want to grow a few programs you already have existing in smaller leaps and so forth. And the question is, how do we get the right mix of which projects we're accepting so that we have some confidence we're going to move toward our goal? And this is why we love this tool called, it's called an aggregate project plan. I wish it was a more elegant name. In Clay Christensen world, we call it APP. But aggregate project plan that basically says, and this is hypothetical for a second, but it's basically on the y-axis, how close to our core are we going to play? So we might be serving our existing market, existing customers, stakeholders with existing programs. Adjacent markets that are close by. So we have already a healthcare offering and nursing. Maybe we're now going to offer a medical assistant program as well. It's an adjacency, something we understand. Something completely brand new that we've never done before, and reaching students that we've never done with maybe an employer we've never worked with in the community. Okay, that's on one. And then we say sort of the how to win is, are we going to use existing assets, resources, processes, priorities? So if you go back to that existing RPP, business model, value proposition, resources, processes, revenue formula, are we going to use our existing services and basically do this from within a current business model that we have? Are we going to use the current business model but just add some extra things on top of it? Layer on some new wraparound services but not fundamentally change the DNA? Or are we literally going to be developing new services and assets that require new organizational models to execute on this? And the most transformational projects are going to be those that target totally new areas, right? And developing new services. We call these adjacent over here, and these are core. You can name these whatever you want, and I've seen a lot of different ways to play with that X and Y axis. So I'm not using this as like the holy grail, but more as illustrative of how to think about this. And you basically are going to start to say, if we know that a core, adding on to our core, we can grow each of these programs probably roughly 20, 30 students a year for X number of years, we can probably do 5 of those per year or something like that. Be focusing on growing 5 programs a year. And we have capacity to maybe do a couple adjacencies, have that in a given year. And we probably can only do a transformational project where we're launching a brand new program once every 2 to 3 years. Like that just takes a lot more resources and energy and so forth. And so what you end up is basically a train schedule where you say, we're going to be like every single year we're going to be launching a certain number of programs that require a certain amount of resources. And by the way, for every single transformational program that's successful, we actually have to launch 3 or 4 that are going to fail to do it. And so that's sort of, we look to our campus's history or other campuses like us and figure out how many do we have to launch of each of these to be successful. And that starts to understand your actual budget and resources and time and so forth. So you can build a very clear map for you of how much innovation are you going to be doing in a year or over many years, and how do you budget across from each of these? I'm going to pause for a second. Is this making sense so far? Any questions? Okay. Just feel free to just shoot up hands if you have questions or comments at some point, okay? And then we go into this innovation funnel, and the big idea is we don't want to compare core projects against transformational ones when we're deciding whether to do something or not, right? We want to bucket all of the transformational project ideas, and as we're collecting them in this early stage of the funnel, the big idea is, and we call this the ideation and innovation funnel. This is actually something that we at Entangled have done for a college. This is the actual process that they ended up with. Not everyone's going to have exactly 3 stage gates and things like that, but we built it for their particular circumstance. Basically, you get all these ideas, and the first key is to take them and just very quickly, like I'm talking like a few hours of work, not many weeks, just bucket transformational, adjacent, core. Okay. We're meeting, the faculty meeting or the committee meeting or whatever it is once a month or it's quarterly. When we get together, we'll just quickly look at these and say, yes, promising, no, that's a terrible idea relative to that, and so forth, just to pass them along to an opportunity assessment where we're going to start to flesh out what do these ideas might look like. And this opportunity assessment phase is literally like a week or 2 of just fleshing out what does this idea look like if we're going to serve new students in this new program we've never offered before. We want to partner with Amazon and offer a supply chain logistics program, and so we're going to create something around that really quickly. Like, what would it look like? Just very simple desk research, business modeling, academic program, and so forth, and then again, at your monthly meeting or quarterly meeting or whatever else, you say, okay, we've got 3 transformation projects. We've fleshed out a little bit. We've got 6 adjacencies. We've got 10 cores. This is how many we're looking to have come through the gate. And you're just going to compare them against each other and say, yeah, that looks like, that looks really interesting. If we could execute it, and holy cow, it'd be amazing. It's consistent with our values. It seems to have promise. And I kind of trust the ideas. This one we're going to shelve, never come back to it. This one we're going to shelve and just sort of leave there to revisit the next time we all convene. Because it's super intriguing, but we only have the capacity to do one right now. And if this one doesn't work out that we think we're going to go do, then we'll come back to this and keep it in the kitty, keep it in the hopper, if you will. This is also a way to do radical transparency on your campus, because as faculty are wondering, why not my idea, or why did you shuttle my idea, or whatever, or what happens to it? It's a clear way for them to say, hey, this is the process we have for thinking through ideas, for putting things into motion, that makes it very clear to everyone sort of the trade-offs and decisions that we've made and what we believe our capacity is. So we're not hiding it from anyone. We're actually trying to open it up to people so that we actually want your ideas as part of this and have you coming to us, but knowing that just because you have a cool idea doesn't mean it'll, don't be offended if it doesn't make it. It's going through this process that has clear delineations. And so then there's a second screen and then an opportunity analysis where you're going to actually start to budget out what might this look like and so forth, and then go into what we call a discovery-driven planning process. I'm going to pause for a moment and quick question for you all. Do you feel like on your campuses today you have the strategy and an understanding of goals and gaps to even start this, or would you start at step 1? Like where are people? I'm just curious. I'm seeing hit.
Well, we have an operational plan that would fit well.
That would fit well there. Okay, so you guys would be set up for that. Others feel like yes, no. Strategic plan with clear set. So good. Okay. Yep. Yeah, part of the governance system. Totally. Others, yeah.
you have different size circles? Do the size of the circles represent the amount of resources that I just?
Yeah, that was the idea. Like the bigger circles. This also represents me not being happy with my graphic designer. But what we were supposed to do is these are supposed to funnel out, so you could see transformational being pit against transformational, adjacent being pit against adjacency, core being pit against core. Didn't exactly happen, but presumably transformational projects are going to require a lot more resources and so forth. That's why you can only do so many of them. And it's probably going to take a lot more administrative time as well. This is the other thing when you think back to that transformation A and B dual transformation process. And I should have mentioned Clark Gilbert and Scott Anthony, and there's one other, I think Mark Johnson's the other author on this. There's a book called Dual Transformation that I would highly, highly recommend reading to think about how to manage this process. And several of the examples are Arizona State and Southern New Hampshire and so forth. Just because they talk a lot about what's the role of the leader and administration and so forth in these things. And one thing is that we often say is that, presidents spend a lot of time on existing programs and helping them keep running, but really they don't really need the president. Like they kind of go once that's the clockwork. And so you really need those leaders focusing on those new things though, and those new ideas, because that's where you don't know how it's going to work out. And you want someone who's really, leaning in and making sure you're not going to embarrass the campus, mitigating risk, but also chasing the opportunity, for a breakthrough for the campus as well. Yeah, sorry, Dual Transformation. Dual Transformation, is the book. You just got out of stock on, is it really? So interesting, okay. Is it, I don't even know who published it. It's probably the book I've recommended the most over the last year or two. It's been pretty influential in my thinking, yeah. Yeah, let's dive into that question right now. So we may end up walking through this faster than I anticipated. And then my thought was we would go to each of our tables then and start to dive in on a particular idea and think through how this would play out. So, and I'll get to that question. So I'm going to give you the whole process of discovery-driven planning, and then we can go back into each phase, okay? So there's basically two kinds of strategy processes, broadly speaking. One is a very deliberate one, top down, when you have lots of certainty, right? And those core innovations that we were talking about can follow into this. They don't need so many stage gates. You can get into that detailed planning pretty quickly because you make assumptions about how the world works. If you do, if we spend X amount more on marketing or outreach, we'll get X number more applications of students, and of that, Y will be what we accept. And we pretty much understand that wheel within this program. We understand how that's going to work. And so our assumptions are extraordinarily reliable, and you can make really good outcome-based projections based on those assumptions, and then make decisions to implement accordingly, right? This core project looks like a better use of resources than this one because the amount of marketing dollars is significantly less compared to this one for the same outcome, right? That's at the level at which you would be making that sort of a decision. And then you can literally implement that deliberate strategy. The flip side, is when you're doing something totally unfamiliar. So you're launching one of those transformational programs. It's a new academic area you don't know. It's a new modality. It's competency-based learning, whatever it might be. It's some relationship with an employer. We have no idea if employees will actually care about this sort of thing. We say start instead with the desired outcomes. What does this have to look like for us to say this is a good use of our time and resources and mission? Right? And just start with that up front. And that's the SMART goal, being clear about your strategy thing, right? And then from there, the question should be what assumptions have to prove true that we're making implicitly for this desired outcome to materialize. And so literally, and as you'll see, it's a brainstorming session of just what are all the assumptions that have to prove true for this to be right? You know, investment has to be this much, and you're basically creating a reverse financials, a reverse outcome-based sheet of, let's say it's, you know, the goal is to bring in $500,000 more to the bottom line to support the campus, right? You would then say, okay, quick fish tree, $500,000. That means X number of students paying this much per term. Okay, the recruitment of that students, that represents this percentage of the marketplace. That's an assumption. Do I believe I can actually get those? Right, and then the flip side would be, is the tuition that I'm asking reasonable, and then costs on the other side, right? And so it's sort of a fish tree financials, if you will, of a reverse financials, and then from there you're implementing a plan, not to implement the plan, but to learn if your assumptions are reasonable. So it's basically all about mitigating risk and trying to figure out, is this crazy idea we've had a good one? And not to celebrate being right or wrong, but to celebrate getting more information to figuring out if this is a viable path. I'll say more in a moment. And then as the assumptions prove valid, and each turn around those gates, you're getting more and more specific on the financial metrics, student metrics, et cetera. That's when you implement, when those assumptions are just proving valid such that you don't have those questions anymore. It's time to go. And the big idea here is you're trying to avoid catastrophic failure and try to move to fast failure. The Lean Startup was based on this methodology. I personally like this more because it's more disciplined than like just quickly try a bunch of stuff and minimum viable product, and which doesn't feel like right to me for a university or a college. So and the focus here, right, it's on outcomes on the other one. And the danger, if you take an unfamiliar thing and you run it through this process, it's sort of like my AOL story, right, from this morning, where, you know, I showed them the financials and they said, well, that doesn't promise enough margin, Michael. We're going to torpedo this. Well, what did I do? I just went back to my spreadsheet and I amped up the price and number of people who would pay and showed them outcomes that would. And they're like, oh, yeah, that's great. Let's go invest in that. Like, it's just a ridiculous game, right? And so if we all know what the outcomes have to be, let's instead focus on the assumptions. And when the assumptions prove true, that's when we go do something, okay? So the step is really, you have a basic raw plan in place, not too much detail about it. Basic idea of what it's going to you start with the outcomes, so you start making it look good enough. And then you start to ask all these sorts of questions. Do we have the right team to do this? Do we have the right student experience nailed, faculty experience, solution, business model, the channel? Are we working through employers? Will that work? Culture, on and on and on. All of these questions, financial model, et cetera. And I'll leave that up. You get a team together and spend half a day or a day listing out all the assumptions undergirding this idea that you have that's unfamiliar to the campus. And at the end, you'll see, like, you know, some of these places will come up with 150 different assumptions that have to be tested. That's great. More assumptions, the better. And for a leader, this is really neat because you can also see where your skeptics are in your room, right? It's a great tool to actually figure out who's not on board with this idea because they have some pretty big questions. So the key, I wrote up team there. This is going to get to the question earlier of how do we get the right organizational structure. This is stepping a little bit outside of the discovery-driven planning, but I put it in here when I got that question that you asked this morning. So the idea is that certain problems require, depending on the level of problem that you have, it requires a different team to implement it. So the level of change, if it's just improving the performance of a component within the school, so it might be a particular program, a particular class, whatever else, you only need what we call a functional team. A team of, you know, of the department head and the department members itself can solve this. There's no contingencies with other folks on campus. The second way is if you're trying to change in that business model how the resources or processes fit together in a model, you need what we call a lightweight team. And we don't say lightweight based on the intellectual capabilities of the members, but it's basically a light team that has a project manager that's coordinating across departments to help make change possible. We have these all the time in universities, right, and colleges of people that are helping shuttle back and forth to make things happen. The challenge comes when we ask a lightweight team to actually rethink what are the resources themselves, the processes, and how they interact with each other. And we ask a lightweight team to do it because they don't have the authority to re-envision this. And so in those scenarios, you need to take people out of the department head into what we call a heavyweight team with a project leader that has the authority to make decisions and say, you have the freedom to rethink how we do this. If you say your department is no longer needed, that's fine, but bring your functional expertise in as you do that. And so a classic story here is Toyota on the hybrid cars. When they created the Prius, the first Prius, 2002, something like that, 1, 2, something like that, they designed it within a heavyweight team. So they took all of their they took an engineer out of basically every single department within the automobile, steering column, brakes, gear shift, transmission, yada, 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 and brought them all together and said, we want you to rethink what an automobile will look like with a hybrid engine, and you have the freedom to rethink it. Do not be loyal to your department. Your loyalty is to the project of coming up with the best hybrid automobile possible. And they did that, right? They created a really elegant machine, and they totally rethought the architecture of the car. When you step on the brakes, it actually creates power that fuels up the battery. Like things that you just would never have done if you had done it within your silos and you were being loyal to your silo as opposed to the mission of the particular project. And what Toyota did was, for the first generation of the Prius, they left this heavyweight team separate from the organization and just let them hone it. And then in the second version, they did the same thing. And then they started to aggressively codify what were the new practices and so forth. And then they folded it back in, those lessons, into their assembly lines and processes for creating all cars. Once they had done this detailed codification of what needed to change and how it worked and so forth. What's interesting is heavyweight teams are expensive, right? Like they require a lot of overhead to manage. So you don't want to keep it a heavyweight team in perpetuity. You want to fold it back into a departmental structure. People only complain about bureaucracy and silos when you're asking them to do something like this, but in that structure. When you're asking someone to do that and you give them this structure, then they complain about all the overhead and hoops that they have to jump through when they could just simply do something. And so it's really matching the right type of level of change with the right type of team. Now, I just contrast this with Honda when they designed their initial hybrid, the Civic. So Civic was an internal combustion car. They also designed a Civic version of a hybrid, and they did it within a lightweight team. And for anyone that drove a Prius back in 2002 versus a Honda Civic hybrid, you knew the difference immediately. Like, it was kludgy, it was basically sort of a hybrid structure superimposed on top of. And so this heavyweight team is really important. And then the last one is that autonomous team, is when you actually want to rethink the revenue structure, every single thing, and really be disruptive, maybe even to what we do today. And there you literally are pulling it out, and you're going to leave that separate forever. That's the big distinction, is it's going to be a separate thing that lives on its own business model within the corporate or within the campus structure. Does that make sense? Questions? The reason I'm putting this up here is one of the key assumptions is that you have the right team that can execute on whatever your idea is, and making sure you're able to assemble the right people. You got the right people on the bus, and you have them in the right roles and the right freedoms is important, because if you're going to be imposing or layering guided pathways on top of something, and maybe not getting the spirit of it, that might not actually be the best use of your resources. Compared to a project that you actually can successfully execute on. Yeah.
So in higher ed, given our union obligations,
Yeah.
That's just
really hard, what are your suggestions for working with the teams that we have?
Yeah, so appreciate the point. Let me say it this way. When you start to include the union heads in these leadership conversations and help them make these allocation decisions with you, it tends to be less of an issue. Part of team construction isn't just who you want contributing ideas, but also who you want not killing ideas. And so that's part of the, do we have the right people on the bus? And so bringing them in early so they see it's not we're not doing this to kill a tenured unionized X, right? But really to create the new thing that will actually lift all of us. Having them in on that is really important. I've seen schools where they'll have the union leader be part of the weekly meeting, actively designing it, and they know that they hate it the whole time, but it actually helps. It's not just buy-in. It also starts to build goodwill, that we're not trying to hide something from you and pull something around you, that when we ask for you to use some union members that step outside of this contract, can we create a sidecar to the contract that allows that to occur, right? And sometimes you do need to actually do those explicit written things so that there is not a problem. And other times you can create an standard operating procedure up front with them that says, we know we're going to use some members over time. This is the process through which that we'll do that, such that we don't abuse the rights, hours, salaries, whatever it might be, right? Protections that you've negotiated in any way, and this is how we'll work around it together. So I would say it's a bad idea to try to say, well, we can't do it, and therefore we're going to do a transformational project and just deal with it in the lightweight team. You could do it, but you're just going to get a watered down version of what you really want. And so there is some reality to that, and try to work within the structure accordingly. It's a great question. Others like that? Otherwise, I'll keep pushing, but I feel like I'm throwing a lot right now. Okay, so once you have this full list of assumptions out there, sitting out there, and so forth, the key then is to prioritize the order in which you need to test them. Right? If you have 150 assumptions about a plan, it's not going to make sense to go out of the gate and try to test all 150. That's going to be pretty challenging. And so what we like to do is play a little game where you then as a team rank all of the assumptions. And you put one metric is the confidence that the assumption is correct. So, and the question we like to ask is, how confident are you that you were right about that assumption? Are you willing to give up? Are you willing to give up 1 year's salary if you're wrong? In which case, you're extremely confident. Maybe you're not willing to give up any salary at all because you really aren't confident that the assumption is correct. That's great. That's something that we need to test and we need to know about, okay? So we have low confidence, right, in that case, that the assumption is correct. And then the other axis is the danger if the assumption is wrong. So certain things that we might, excuse me, have low confidence in, maybe not very material to the success of the initiative. And so the question is, what happens if we're wrong about a given assumption? Is game over, like this is just a terrible idea? In which case the danger is quite high, or no impact, low, or it's something that we can tweak that sits in the middle. And basically what that allows you to do is have 3 zones of assumptions that come out of this. One is the, holy cow, we have no idea if we're right about this assumption, and if we're wrong, the whole thing blows up. We better check that right away. Zone 2 is the, okay, we can check that next down the line as we start to dig in. And zone 3 is the, we'll check that at the very end. Maybe even we're going to actually implement the pilot, and we'll figure it out as we're going, because it's just not that big a deal, and we have some confidence that we're right. As you've so now you have this checklist, and you go into tests of the assumptions. And the key of the tests is to basically say, we have 1 month until our next checkpoint when we come to the meeting and decide, are we going to continue to invest in this project or not? How can we quickly, rapidly test to just get information about whether this assumption is right or wrong, or keep investigating? And some of it might be just looking to your own history research, calling another school that's done something similar, right? There's low cost ways of doing that. And so to your question earlier, in those first couple stage gates, it's desk research, right? Like your financials can be super like back of the envelope, just basics, you know, pulses to say, yep, looks good, let's keep going. Or, you know what, that assumption's not quite right. Let's make a change to the plan. We're never going to be able to reach those employees within Amazon. We should be working with T-Mobile instead. And so forth, right? Like I just picked up I picked up the phone, called my friend in Amazon, and they said, we aren't talking to you. You know, right? Okay, I better I knew now than, then I'm the governor of California with Udacity and San Jose State announcing that we're about to change education with an online initiative for $100 million and without testing it first. Not that that ever happened to Jerry Brown, but so. And then you can also do rapid good enough prototypes. So, for example, something might be around, do we have the job to be done? Do we understand it right? It might be a simple conversation with the student you think you're serving, just to figure out, like, do we have this correct, and will this and like put them through a role playing to see, like, if we introduce a counselor at this stage, will that help them, or will that mean that they feel alienated and put down upon and they're never going to come back? Right? Like little things, how do we create prototypes that allow us to test these assumptions? And here's the real answer to your question. In that first gate, you're just like gut check questions, financials are back of the envelope, you know, really quick things. Yes, we're going to go forward. No, we're not. We're going to tweak it. And then as you get successive gates, like your financials goes to an 8x11 maybe, and then detailed spreadsheet as you go in the third, fourth, fifth stage gates, if it keeps advancing. And the reality is, I can't remember what my next slide is. Oh yeah, okay, good. So that as each time you hit a milestone, you're asking yourself, you come together and you look at the results of the assumptions. And if you are in charge of testing an assumption around the Amazon thing, and you're like, I know Amazon's going to love to work with us, and you get the answer that Amazon doesn't want to work with you, that's success. You're celebrating a clear answer to whether you were right or wrong, not the fact that you were right or wrong. And so that's also how you get people out of this pet project, I need to be right, or I'm going to kill your thing, right, sort of mindset. Celebration is much more about, we got clear answer from our test to whether this is worth continuing to do or not. And at each side, at each of these stage gates, you're going to get a sign, gosh, 80% of the assumptions we tested were correct. I think we're on to something. Or, 75% seemed right, 25% were a little fuzzy. We're going to have to test those again in the next round. And we're going to have to just kind of be cautious, not do a huge investment. It's not worth killing at this stage, but rather than do the $250,000 investment we thought we're going to do, we're just going to do $25,000 over the next month to learn a little bit more. And then a third might be, we've learned some stuff in this that just says this isn't right, but holy cow, we've realized that if we just change the initiative a little bit, there's a path forward. And so let's revector it. And gosh, isn't it good we learned that now before we went whole hog with a $2 million investment? And then same thing for that last one. You find out, 70, 80% of our assumptions were just dead in the water, incorrect. Let's shelve this plan. We'll do something. We'll invest in something else. Better we know now before we invested a lot of our human capital, financial capital, and political capital in an idea that wasn't going to go forward. So that's basically the process. That's a whirlwind stuff. Normally what we do is literally we start with a couple ideas and we actually prototype it through and introduce each stage of it before. Obviously, you haven't come here with a developed idea initially. So that's why I gave the whirlwind fountain. I'm going to pause. I'd love to hear questions, comments, how it might work at your campus, pushbacks, and so forth. And then would love to break out into the tables again and actually have some of those conversations around how might you implement this around a particular idea and what might the assumptions be, and actually do to pick that one idea among your table and brainstorm some assumptions about what has to be correct for it to work. Okay, that'll be the activity. But first, let's have a conversation just of questions and comments. Y'all aren't talking. Does that mean it didn't land, or it makes sense? Oh, that's fair. And the power just went out here. We'll turn it back on in a sec. I can actually see it this way. But so thinking, but thoughts about the assumptions exercise, where you might sit this in a committee? What we're finding is that it can be done in ad hoc committees, structures on campuses. So to your point about teams earlier, you can create an ad hoc committee structure to review these sorts of things. If you want to make a huge investment into new programs, but you don't have that capacity, that's where someone like we, right, actually come in and outsource. You outsource it to us to work with you on, and do some of that stage gating and testing and so forth, and bringing it back to the faculty committee to say up or down on, as more of a reporting relationship. If that, so there's different ways to do this. In other words, yeah.
So each of these would have a different communication strategy, I would presume also, and maybe different tentacles going or connections to the institution.
Totally, yeah, and that would be part of the assumptions also, right? Because so an assumption might be we can get the right team structure given our union contract is up for renegotiation, and the timing is this, and we can communicate it to the policymakers and given the political environment, yada yada, right? Like this is all ways of managing risk to try to create opportunities for big innovation without putting you in front of it prematurely. And the idea is to improve the hit rate by giving you these stage gates to quickly say, not working, but we still know we got to launch that transformational initiative. We've got 2 more in the kitty that looked pretty good. Let's try one of those. And so you're constantly regenerating, and absolutely communications is a key assumption. Politics, team, union, shared governance, curricular approval, accreditors, right? We didn't talk about them, right? All these things would be assumptions that are embedded in a more transformational idea. The flip is a core idea. Again, you don't really need to take it through such an arduous process. Core idea is you have a better sense of how the world works, and you can probably do a much more detailed financials much quicker, detailed assumptions about whatever your goal is. I'm doing the enrollment revenue one right now, but and quickly say like, yeah, this makes sense or this doesn't, right? Or it might be like, we know every time we add a mentor, hire a new mentor, and up this, we boost our graduation rate by X%, and we boost, and when we invest this much in career services, we boost employment links this much, right? Those are examples of core projects, things that you can do. They're not going to have huge outsize gains, but they're pretty low risk. You kind of already know how to build the models, and so you can do it much more quickly and make decisions of like core projects and say, does it make sense to hire 2 more people in career services versus 3 more mentors, right? And make a rational choice. In the transformational space, the argument is you can't make those decisions because you have no idea what's going to happen. So instead, you're doing this discovery-driven approach to validate what seems like a promising idea. Yeah.
I'm having trouble articulating it, but often we have got a really finite set of resources. Some of this is new resource
Sure.
oriented. So does this method also then work with, I don't know, what are you going to stop doing? So that your transformation is stopping this and changing the institution, and then going to something different.
So the answer is yes. I love campuses that are willing to ask that question. I don't find a lot that are. So the answer is yes, right? Because fundamentally you're constrained by resources, and you're making a decision of, do we continue to do what we've always done or not? And it's against a clear goal and a gap identified toward that goal. And so that enables you to ask, gosh, if we were starting from 0, would we choose to invest $10 here or there, right? And make that determination. And it might be that you'd say, okay, our hypothesis is this would be a better way to use dollars consistent with our mission and to stop doing this program. Rather than just make a draconian decision, we're going to actually, take a small portion of dollars and test this first just to make sure that that's correct. And once that proves true, then we're going to go through the process of actually stopping this and doing this instead. And so you could almost think about, it's not just new ideas coming through the funnel, but you're also going to take things you're already doing and bring it through the funnel as well. So you get out of the fixed cost or sunk cost rather trap of, well, we've always been doing it, so we just assume that's how it's done, right? Yeah, and in some ways, this isn't the question you asked, but it's actually a really interesting challenge, because I think the people that invented the spreadsheet have done us a grave disservice on this from a financial metric standpoint, which is so there's going to go a little bit into disruption a little bit deeper, but in the steel mill story, when basically mini mills disrupt integrated steel mills, and the decision that integrated steel mills always had to deal with was, gosh, there's a technology that can allow us to make steel for 20% lower cost at the same quality. Should we invest? Well, it seems like a no-brainer, except that they had already invested hundreds of millions of dollars building the plant as it was. And so they never considered the cost of, they always looked at the marginal cost of just building steel in their existing plant versus the cost of building an entire new plant of mini mills and the marginal cost there. And that always made sense to continue to do what they were doing. And so sometimes you have to take you out of the marginal cost thinking and ask, if we were to do this from scratch today, what would we do? That's a very painful, tough decision. There's no financial tools to allow you to do it. But the idea is, if you can start from ground zero and say, gosh, which one actually makes more sense, with a clear sense of what our mission and what we're trying to do is, you might make decisions that you wouldn't otherwise if you're just looking at marginal cost. But it actually causes the innovator's dilemma in many cases, because you say, well, we already have the campus, so we might as well just keep doing X. Others? Okay, let's take 15 minutes, and what we'll do is go into the tables. This is what I would love to have you do is, and I'll get the power back on to show up this slide on assumptions, but is take an idea. Actually, we'll probably take more like 20 or 30 minutes. Take an idea and from someone at your table about an innovative thing that you want to do, that you say, gosh, I'd love to see our campus do X, and then quickly sketch out what would be involved in it. What does it look like? How many, if you're launching a new degree program, how long is it? What type of students are you serving? How much are you going to charge? Just some quick things, right? So you all have the same mental model. And then go through the exercise of listing out assumptions that have to prove true for you to be successful in this program, okay? So does that make sense to folks? Part of that is starting to also have a clear statement of success in this program is, educating 100 students and placing 80 of them into great jobs after 90 days after they graduate, or something like that. Okay, cool. Let's spend a little time doing it, and then most creative assumption that gets out there. Or actually, let's do this. Team, the table that gets the most assumptions, I'll send a couple signed books to that college.
Oh, let me grab them, thanks.
All righty. Let's come back to tables. We'll go around the room and do a little wrap-up conversation. So, I'm curious. Raw number. Sorry, of assumptions. We'll do both. Okay. It's okay. We'll do both. How many people had more than 10 assumptions at their table? Okay. How many people had more than 30? Any table have more than 30? Oh, more than 30? 120? Holy cow. Okay. Skeptic over here. Yeah, yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, I'll Can we get a mic there so you can tell us a few of them and your idea?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so Atta said he was going to do this, that he was going to raise his hand and then get called on and point at me, which I guess is leadership, right? So basically, the reason we're claiming 120, or I actually claim infinite assumptions that we are wanting to deconstruct, is that we actually would like to just throw out the entire model of higher education that we have right now and build a new one from the ground up. There are so many historic relics in our current model, even things like if you start with the fact that we have West Coast schools have a quarter schedule and East Coast schools have a semester schedule, and that's based on an agricultural economy that most of the students at Bellevue College do not participate in anymore. So, I mean, even that sort of fundamental foundational thing we would like to just do away with. And one of the other things we were talking about is that we have this great potential for that at Bellevue College coming up with our new provost, who is supposed to be breaking down our silos. So that... our new provost, who will throw out all assumptions. So
what were some of the assumptions? I just want to hear, like, just list a bunch of them.
Well, so I mean, assumptions about everything. We are talking about the assumptions about the way we schedule classes, both in the quarter and from day to day. Right? Students come into campus and they take a class for 1 hour every day at the same time all week. That then costs them $6 in bus fare and makes it very difficult for them to have another job. So what if we threw out the assumption that that was the way to teach? What if we threw out the assumption that, arts goes with humanities on our campus and therefore that is an academic division? Why is that true? Why are science and social science different academic divisions? Why is advising done by a different person who does counseling, by a different person that does financial aid? And we have all these different ways of doing things. We've got this Welcome Center, Student Central now, that's trying to break down some of that. But even understanding that those things are student services and instruction is all these other things. Like, basically, we want to get rid of all 120 assumptions that the college holds. So.
Wow.
We think small at Bellevue College.
Yeah, no kidding. So, love it. Yeah. So the books are coming your way. I'm going to flip it on its head now. When you go back to your campus and to the extent you start to put this in action, the idea would be then not to sit there deconstructing what's there with the assumptions, but instead the opposite, right? To say, this is the new thing. It's going to be competency-based, no semesters, no quarters, no scheduling, actually, because students can self-schedule within the system. It'll be a flex environment. They can do it both virtually and come in ground, yada, yada. So you design your program at a high level, and then the assumptions will be students will know how to schedule themselves in that. They will have the agency to be able to make those decisions. There are mentors that we could hire that would do, right? Like, so those would be all the assumptions of the plan. And the question was asked earlier, and I'll let others jump in as well. Should assumptions be listed as a question or a statement? And my answer was, I typically think of it as a statement. Like, we're assuming this is correct because it has to prove it's a hypothesis in effect, right? Maybe better word than assumption would be hypothesis. It's a scientific hypothesis. We're now going to test if it's right or wrong, and if it's wrong, that means that something like it's not going to work. Like our idea is not going to work exactly as we planned. So we're either going to iterate on the idea and change it slightly, or conclude this is just too central. Like if you all concluded that quarters were actually really, really important to the fabric of people's biological clocks, then your idea wouldn't work. That's obviously a very silly one. But although the Department of Education probably doesn't think so. But so anyway, you know, but actually a more serious assumption might be that you could get federal financial aid dispersed in a manner decoupled with the time-based system, because even Western Governors University is actually still every 6 months, right? They map competencies back to time. That actually might not be what you want. Maybe you want a lifelong membership model, or you want to pay for progress that as you master competencies, you know, dollars flow, and that's a big assumption. The federal government just can't do that, right? So there's a variety, and then you might say, well, what if an employer were our payer instead of the federal government? And that would be the sort of iteration, right, that would occur. So just a concrete example. Others have thoughts, comments, want to jump in with creative assumptions that they listed? Seemed like there was creative assumptions here. Give us a little bit about the idea.
As we're moving into guided pathways, we have committees working on integrating contextualization into the curriculum. And so we realized that one of the big assumptions we're making is that having curriculum that is authentic to the students' pathways will help them stay on that pathway, or change if they need to, but that will get them engaged and help their success.
Like it. Others? Okay. I'm going to make one other macro comment. Someone said, a few people have said to me, this is a lot of stuff. How are we going to possibly put this all into place? I don't think I'm expecting, or you should expect, to put everything in place. Obviously, I'll do a quick pitch on Entangled, right? Like if you want to work with us and do that, that's what we're here for. But I think the bigger point, again, is ideas, frameworks to think about how you might do this work, and not to create everything in a discovery-driven manner tomorrow, but more to say, okay, we have two ideas we're thinking about. Should we compare these against each other? How might we approach this problem? Let's create a process to do that and start to build some muscle around that idea. And you might even say, holy cow, these are two totally different ideas. We should not be comparing them against each other, right? Little wins like that start to unlock new ways of doing things that cause you to go down these pathways. Another thing a lot of people have said to me is love the idea that the legislature is never going to let us do X. I would come at it from a different. So I think that may be true, but I also think that often if you're creating a program where, say, like an employer is going to be the primary payer, and it doesn't have to result in a degree. It's going to be a credential or a certificate of some sort, or you might actually, I'm going to spin here a little bit, but Degreed is a company that helps measure skill competencies that employers have. Maybe they're the assessor of the certificate, and that has value in the market for these employers with whom they work. I don't know. My guess is that if you go truly out of those bounds, you're going to have a lot more freedom if you're creating a self-sustaining program within those bounds to totally rethink assumptions around some of this stuff. And so in some ways, counterintuitively, the further you get away from them, particularly from funding, the more freedom sometimes you can get them to give you, is what I would say. At least has been my experience. The third thing, particularly, by the way, again, if you can show economic development, places will move pretty quick to say, and it doesn't cost us anything. Sure, try it. That goes to the third thing, which is a few people have said, we're pretty resource constrained environments. How do we get resources to do this when everything's getting sucked up by the core stuff and just day to day? So this is an area where there's sort of a couple different options. leadership can carve out that we're not doing this and we're going to use these dollars to create an innovation fund that is going to do this. Or you might say, hey, we're going to just, we have actually $25,000 of free cash flow here. We're going to spend it a little bit on playing around with this idea just to test if it's viable. And if it looks good, then we're going to go to a foundation and actually raise dollars and do something bigger, right? And those are often, I think, of the role of foundations and employers as that free cash flow, that injection of innovation energy that allows you to put people on an idea full time to do something. Because the last thing I'll say is Google and other companies get a lot of attention for the 20% time. An employee gets 20% time to think of whatever they want to do and try it. That can work to a point. At some point, it's got to become someone's job. And if your job is to think about innovation a little bit, it's no one's job. And so it is important to figure out, obviously, different models to unleash that. And I don't want to minimize the challenge of that, but I also don't want to minimize the challenge of not doing that. And given the amount of innovation that we see in the higher ed space right now, and employer changes, gig economy changes, automation changes, need for lifelong learning, I think there's going to be, if those who don't act are going to have challenges, but I think there's just so many opportunities right now to really rethink how do we best serve students and to benefit the communities in which you all live and inhabit on a daily basis. So I'm pretty excited about the opportunities that higher ed has right now, even acknowledging some of these constraints. Any other questions before I do my final wrap up? All right. So one in the back. Where's? Oh, there we go. Sorry. Yep.
Just a comment.
Yeah.
When you were talking about the different jobs that students were looking for when they came to a community college or came to college at all, you told a little story for each one, and that really helped me to wrap my mind around it.
Yeah.
I struggled wrapping my mind around this model, and it would have been helpful for me to
Story.
hear a story like that to really sort of be able to think through it a little bit more easily.
Appreciate that. Thank you. I think you're right. And I violated actually one of my things, which is I always like to have a story before I tell something, and I didn't here. I raced through it. So thank you. You're right. Feedback like that, helpful. So I appreciate it. Anything else? Okay. We've raced through this afternoon just because of how time ended up shaken out, but I have enjoyed the time with you all. Excited about the energy that I'm seeing here. And really just hoping to see innovation that unlocks opportunities for students to live fulfilling lives, right? And some of that may be employment, some of that might be civically engaged, some of that might be building healthier and more sustainable communities that create civically engaged people that are great participants in the democracy. And I think we're at a time right now in our society where we need a heck of a lot more of that as well. And you all are obviously the front lines of that. So the only thing I'd ultimately say is I hope the frameworks are useful in thinking new ways to think through. Some of the leave behinds I hope will be useful in that way as well. Seriously, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Giving you my information, and I'd love to be useful to you, but also learn from you. Have already taken several things away from today, and excited to continue on the journey and be innovating with you. So thank you so much. Appreciate it, and I'll turn it back to you.
So this is a great kind of afternoon and full day to have stuff that was both the theoretical, but then being able to work together and have some things that we can bring back and think about over the weekend and actually start working on Monday. So I like that practical application where we can do things, and that's certainly what we're trying to do throughout CTC LDA events. So I'm going to pitch the next one, right? In 5.5 months, you have 5.5 months to think about this because we'll be in Spokane on the 16th and 17th of August. And we'll be getting information out soon about what that's going to look like. But I really want to urge people to have those days at least blocked for yourselves or people at your colleges and your teams that could work together productively like this on different things that they can bring back to the colleges and start making more changes for student success in this state. So mark that off. It might not. It's going to be hot in Spokane, but maybe good golfing if you want to do that before, or the lake, and incorporate your family vacations. No. Last thing is, again, for the third time, there are evaluations. Make sure you leave one on the table or at the front desk. And we hope to see you in August. Thank you.